Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Eat, Shoots, and Leaves. Yeah, we're getting ready to hit a new chapter in which we look at the comma, because last episode we finished off about the apostrophe. But with that said, let's get into this. When the humorist James Thurber was writing for New Yorker editor Harold Ross in the 1930s and 1940s, the two men often had very strong words about commas. It is pleasant to picture the scene: two hard drinking alpha males and serious trilbies smacking a big desk and barking at each other over the niceties of punctuation. According to Thurber's account of the matter in The Years with Ross, 1959, Ross's clarification complex tended to run somewhat to the extreme. He seemed to believe that there was no limit to the amount of clarification you could achieve if you just kept adding commas. Thurber, by self-appointed virtuous contrast, saw commas as so many upturned office chairs unhelpfully hurled down the wide open corridor of readability, and so they endlessly disagreed. If Ross were to write red, white, and blue with the maximum number of commas, Thurber would defiantly state a preference for red, white, and blue with none at all, on the provocative grounds that all those commas make the flag seem rained on. They give it a furrowed look. If you want to know about editorial commaphilia as a source of chronic antagonism, read The Years with Ross. Thurber once went so far as to send Ross a few typed lines of one of Wordsworth's Lucy poems, repunctuated in New Yorker style. She lived alone, and few could know when Lucy ceased to be. But she was in her grave, and oh, the difference to me. But Ross, it seems, was unmoved by sarcasm, and in the end, Thurber simply had to resign himself to Ross's way of thinking. After all, he was the boss. He signed the checks, and of course, he was a brilliant editor who endearingly admitted once in a letter to H.L. Mencken, "We have carried editing to a very high degree of fussiness here, probably to a point approaching the ultimate. I don't know how to get it under control, and so the comma proliferated." Thurber was once asked by a correspondent, "Why did you have a comma in the sentence after dinner? The men went to the living room." And his answer was probably one of the loveliest things ever said about punctuation. This particular comma, Thurber explained, was Ross's way of giving the men time to push back their chairs and stand up. Why the problem? Why the scope for such differences of opinion? Aren't there rules for the comma just as there are rules for the apostrophe? Well, yes. But you will be entertained to discover that there is a significant complication in the case of the comma. More than any other mark, the comma draws our attention to the mixed origins of modern punctuation, and its consequent mingling of two quite distinct functions. 1. To illuminate the grammar of a sentence. 2. To point up, rather in the manner of musical notation, such literary qualities as rhythm, direction, pitch, tone, and flow. This is why grown men have knocked down fights over the comma in editorial offices, because these two rows of punctuation sometimes collide head on. Indeed, where the comma is concerned, they do it all the time. In 1582, Richard Mulcaster's The First Part of the Elementary and Early English Grammar described the comma as a small crooked point which in writing followeth some small branch of the sentence, and in reading warneth verses the rest there, verses to rest there, and to help our breath a little. Many subsequent grammars of the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries make the same distinction. When Ross and Thurber were threatening each other with ashtrays over the correct way to render the Star-Spangled Banner, they were reflecting a deep dichotomy in punctuation that had been around in niggling people for over 400 years. On the page, punctuation performs its grammatical function, but in the mind of the reader, it does more than that. It tells the reader how to hum the tune. If only we hadn't started reading quietly to ourselves. Things were so simple at the start before grammar came along and ruined things. The earliest known punctuation, credited to Aristophanes of Byzantium, librarian at Alexandria around 200 BC, was a three-part system of dramatic notation involving single points at different heights in the line, advising actors when to breathe in preparation for a long bit, or a not so long bit, or a relatively short bit. And that's all there is to it. A comma at that time was the name of the relatively short bit. The word means in Greek a piece cut off. And in fact, when the word comma was adopted into English in the 16th century, it still referred to a discrete, separable group of words rather than the friendly little tadpoley number 9 dot with a tail that today we know and love. For a millennium and a half, punctuation's purpose was to guide actors, chanters, and readers aloud through stretches of manuscript, indicating the pauses, accentuating matters of sense and sound, and leaving syntax mostly to look after itself. St. Jerome, who translated the Bible in the 4th century, introduced a system of punctuation of religious text per colla et comata by phrases to aid accurate pausing when reading aloud. Cassiodorus, writing in the 6th century in southern Italy for the guidance of trainee scribes, included punctuation in his Institutiones Divinarium et Secularium Literarum, recommending clear pausing in well-regulated delivery. I do hope Harold Pinter knows about all this, by the way. Who would have thought the pause had such a long and significant history? Most of the marks used by the earliest scribes look bizarre to us now, of course. The positura, a mark like the number 7, which indicated the end of a piece of text. The sinister mark, like the little gallows in a game of hangman, that indicated the start of a paragraph. Paragraphs weren't indented until much later. And significantly here, the virgula suspensiva, which looked like our present-day solidus or forward slash, and was used to mark the briefest pause or hesitation. Perhaps the key thing one needs to realize about the early history of punctuation is that in a literary culture based entirely on the slavish copying of venerated texts, it would be highly presumptuous of a mere scribe to insert helpful marks where he thought they ought to go. Punctuation developed slowly and cautiously, not because it wasn't considered important, but on the contrary, because it was such intensely powerful juju, paused in the wrong place, and the sense of religious text can alter in significant ways. For example, as Cecil Hartley pointed out in his 1818 Principles of Punctuation, or The Art of Pointing, consider the difference between the following. Verily, I say unto thee, this day thou shalt be with me in paradise. And verily I say unto thee this day, thou shalt be with me in paradise. Now, huge doctrinal differences hang on the placing of this comma. The first version, which is how Protestants interpret the passage, lightly skips over the whole unpleasant business of purgatory and takes the crucified thief straight to heaven with our Lord. The second promises paradise at some later date to be confirmed, as it were, and leaves purgatory nicely in the picture for the Catholics who believe in it. Similarly, it is argued that the authorized version of the Bible, and by extension handles Messiah, misleads on the true interpretation of Isaiah XL 3. Again, consider the difference. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord. And the voice of him that crieth, in the wilderness prepare ye the way of the Lord. Also, comfort ye my people. Please go out and comfort my people. And comfort ye my people. Just cheer up, you lot. It might never happen. Of course, if Hebrew or any other ancient languages had included punctuation, in the case of Hebrew, a few vowels might have been nice as well. 2,000 years of scriptural exegesis need never have occurred, and a lot of clever, dandruffy people could definitely have spent more time in the fresh air. But there is no punctuation in those ancient texts, and that's all there is to it. For a considerable period in Latin transcriptions, there were no gaps between words either, if you can credit such madness. Text from the benighted classical period, just capital letters and big square blocks, took to modern eyes like those word search puzzles that you stare at for 20 minutes or so, and then, with a delighted cry, suddenly spot the word paper napkin spelled diagonally and backwards. However, the scripto continua system, as it was called, had its defenders at the time. One 5th century recluse called Cassian argued that if a text was slow to offer up its meaning, this encouraged not only healthy meditation but the glorification of God, the heart lifting in praise. Obviously, at the moment when the word paper napkin suddenly floated to the surface like a synaptic miracle. Isn't this history interesting? Well, I think so, even though for a considerable time, admittedly, not much happened. That imaginative chap, Charlemagne, forward looking Holy Roman Emperor, stirred things up in the ninth century when Alcuin of York came up with a system of positure at the ends of sentences, including one of the earliest question marks. But to be honest, Western systems of punctuation were damned unsatisfactory for the next 500 years until one man, one fabulous Venetian printer, finally wrestled with the issue and pinned it to the mat. That man was Aldus Manutius the Elder, 1450 to 1515, and I will happily admit I hadn't heard of him until about a year ago, but am now absolutely kicking myself that I never volunteered to have his babies. The heroic status of Aldus Manutius the Elder among historians of the printed word cannot be overstated. Who invented the italic typeface? Aldus Manutius. Who printed the first semicolon? Aldus Manutius. The rise of printing in the 14th and 15th centuries meant that a standard system of punctuation was urgently required, and Aldus Manutius was the man to do it. In Pause and Effect from 1992, Malcolm Parks's magisterial account of the history of punctuation in the West, facsimile examples of Aldus's groundbreaking work include a page from Pietro Bembo's De Etna from 1494, which features not only a very elegant Roman typeface, but the actual first semicolon, and believe me, this is exciting. Of course, we did not get our modern system overnight, but Aldus Manutius and his grandson, conveniently of the same name, are generally credited with developing several of our modern conventional signs. They lowered the virgule and curved it for a start so that it began to look like the modern comma. They put colons and full stops at the end of sentences, like this, and also, less comfortably to the modern eye, like this. Most significantly of all, however, they ignored the old marks that had aided the reader aloud. Books were now for reading and understanding, not intoning. Moving your lips was becoming a no-no. Within the 70 years it took for Aldus Manutius the Elder to be replaced by Aldus Manutius the Younger, things changed so drastically that in 1566 Aldus Manutius the Younger was able to state that the main object of punctuation was the clarification of syntax. Forget all that stuff about the spiritual value of the reader, or to the reader, of working out the meaning for himself. Forget as well the humility of these copyists to load. I'm sure people did question whether Italian printers were quite the right people to legislate on the meaning of everything. But on the other hand, resistance was obviously useless against a family that could invent italics. So, what happened to the comma in this process? Well, between the 16th century and the present day, it became a kind of scary grammatical sheepdog. As we shall shortly see, the comma has so many jobs as a separator. Punctuation marks are traditionally either separators, or terminators. that it tears about on the hillside of language and endlessly organizing words into sensible groups and making them stay put, sorting and dividing, circling and herding, and of course, darting off with a peremptory woof to round up any wayward subordinate clause that makes a futile vote for semantic freedom. Commas, if you don't whistle at them to calm down, are unstoppably enthusiastic at this job. Luckily, the trend in the 20th century, starting with H.W. Fowler's The King's English in 1906, has been towards ever simpler punctuation, with fewer and fewer commas. But take any passage from a non contemporary writer, and you can't help seeing the constituent words as so many defeated sheep that have been successfully corralled with the gate slammed shut by good old Comma, the sheepdog. Jones flung himself at the benefactor's feet, and taking eagerly hold of his hand, assured him his goodness to him, both now and at all other times, had so infinitely exceeded not only his merit, but his hopes, that no words could express his sense of it. From Tom Jones, written by Henry Fielding. And it needed a quick eye to detect from among the huddled masses of sleepers the form of any given individual, as they lay closely packed together, covered, for warmth's sake, they patched with their patched and ragged clothes. Little could be distinguished from the sharp outlines of pale faces, over which somber light shed the same dull, heavy color, with here and there a gaunt arm thrust forth, its thinness hidden by no covering, but fully exposed to view in all its shrunken ugliness. From Nicholas Nickleby, by Charles Dickens. No wonder feelings run high about the comma when it comes to improving the clarity of a sentence. You can nearly always argue that one should go in. You can nearly always argue that one should come out. Stylists have always dickered with the rules. Oscar Wilde famously spent all day on a completed poem, dangling a questionable comma over it. Gertrude Stein called the comma servile and refused to have anything to do with it. Peter Carey cleverly won the Booker Prize in 2001 for a book that contained no commas at all, True History of the Kelly Gang. And I've seen an essay on the internet seriously accusing John Updike, that wicked man, of bending the rules of the comma to his own ends, with fragments, comma splices, coordinate clauses without commas, ellipted coordinate clauses with commas, and more. Charges to which, of course, those of us with no idea what an ellipted coordinate clause with a comma might look like can only comment, tisk. Meanwhile, lawyers eschew the comma as far as possible, regarding it as a troublemaker, and readers grow so accustomed to the dwindling incidence of commas in public places that when signs go up saying "no dogs please," only one person in the 1,000 bothers to point out that actually As a statement, no dogs please is an indefensible generalization since many dogs do please. As a matter of fact, they rather make a point of it. So, yeah. But we'll go ahead and end that episode there. Yeah. Um, we get a good bit of origin of the comma and how it's talked about. She talks about quite a bit about language and punctuation and how the comma has always kind of been the troublemaker and people never can seem to agree how to properly use it. But use it they still do. Grammar. She goes back in history and talks a lot of ancient grammar and punctuation, talking of librarians and printers and other documentation and how the punctuation has slowly evolved and changed. And gives several examples. Verily, I say unto thee, this day thou shalt be with me in paradise. As opposed to, verily I say unto thee, this day thou shalt be with me in paradise. So it's about, you will be in paradise with me now. Or, I say unto thee, at some point you will be with me. And then she also gives the difference in how they're written. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Or, the voice of him that crieth, in the wilderness prepare ye the way of the Lord. So it's either a voice that is crying out in the wilderness to prepare the way of the Lord, or it's a voice that cries out, prepare the Lord in the wilderness. The way of the Lord in the wilderness. It's like, so, but there's two different ways that's interpreted. Comfort ye my people. And she gives her own definitions in parentheses under each of these. Comfort ye my people. Please go out and comfort my people. Comfort ye my people. Just cheer up, you lot. It might never happen. So yeah, it shows how things really can be changed by punctuation. She talks a lot about how Audius Manutius, I think she said he was a printer. Yeah, Venetian printer. He really does his own work and change to punctuation and grammar. And even his grandson, Aldus Manutius the Younger, says, hey, punctuation, all it's there for is tell you how to say the sentences. How to voice the sentences. For example, you're asking a question, which way did they go? You end with a question mark. Or if you have real emotion behind it, real fire in the words, which way did they go? Perhaps still have the question mark since it is still a question, but have an exclamation mark too since it is asked in such a manner. So yeah. But she shows how some authors have used the comma, as she read had a small piece from Tom Jones by Henry Fielding and a small piece of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. And then she gives how some famous writers would talk about the comma or use them. Oscar Wilde, Gertrude Stein, Peter Carey, and then John Updike. But yeah. Pretty interesting for starting out on our descriptions of the comma. But with that said, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.